Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. Hey, today on the episode, we've got a great conversation on how people get red pilled. Specifically, we're talking with Mike DiVirgilio, and we're going to be talking about his journey in the conservative movement. He's a boomer, and he goes by Base Boomer on Twitter, so you can follow him there. He wrote a book called Going Back to Find the Way Forward, Trump, A Great Awakening and the Refounding of America. We get into a lot of fun topics. He's really fun to talk to. We could probably made this episode 3 hours long just because there's a variety of things he mentions in the book that we could chase down. But I just enjoyed hearing his story. I think you will too. And we get into how can we relate to boomers who seem to be pretty sensitive to being made fun of or teased for anything at all. And I think Mike provides some good wisdom on that. Before we get into the conversation with Mike, I wanted to make sure you knew a product that I am actively using. I'm using it right now. If you're on YouTube, you can see I've got an arm brace on from my bicep tear, still in recovery, meeting with a doctor this week to talk about taking this brace off and getting back to actually exercising my upper body, which has been really depressing for me not to be able to work out for a few months. But I'm using a product called Ion Layer. Ion Layer is a patch that you can apply different treatments to. NAD Plus specifically is what I'm using in my recovery. And it helps with muscle recovery after workout. Right now, I'm working on stretching out this muscle now that they reattached it to my forearm. And I've got to stretch that thing out. And it helps with mitochondrial growth, all that kind of stuff. And so this is a great product that I promote, I use, and I wanted to make sure the opportunity was extended to you to use it as well. If you head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT, you can get $100 off your first kit. It comes with a money-back guarantee. You meet with a doctor. This is all certified stuff, great product that you can use to boost your energy levels, stay mentally with it, and also recover after workout. So I just wanted to make sure I promote that because I'm using it. I think you might like it. If you're listening to my podcast, you're probably into health and fitness, and this is a great way to enhance your workout and enhance your recovery as well. Let's get into today's conversation with Mike. Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. I'm glad to be joined today by Mike DiVirgilio. Did I get it right, Mike?
Perfect.
Excellent. Excellent.
You're awesome.
Longtime listeners will know that I have a hard time pronouncing what seem to me foreign names. We'll get into nations and nation states later on in the episode. But Mike, you wrote this book, Going Back to Find the Way Forward. Sent me a copy of it. I got to read it. Good read. A lot of it's a testimonial. And so kind of wanted to get into more of your story. What inspired you to write the book? Where did kind of all this come from for you?
Man, it's a long story. So I was born and raised a Catholic, which I thank God for because it gave me two things growing up in a secular environment I wouldn't have had, which was a Christian worldview and a respect for the Bible. So when I was presented at 1978, I went away to college and I moved next door to a couple Jesus freaks. And God had already been after me. The Hound of Heaven, which is a poem from the late 1800s by Francis Thompson, it just describes my Christian walk, even to this moment, because God is just the Hound of Heaven. And so the Bible said you could, when you die, you could know you're going to heaven if you just believe in Jesus. And I go like, wow. So I did, born again. I was part of the Jesus Revolution. I don't know if you saw that movie. It kind of captures a lot of it. I even went to Chuck Smith's church sometimes because it was about 40 minutes away. But so that happened. I was involved in a Christian ministry on campus, really committed. Didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And when I was 24, I was exposed to Reformed theology. Met a gentleman who became my mentor. And through his influence, I decided to go to seminary. And I went to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia. I met my wife to be there, praise the Lord, and have 3 adult children and 2 3/4 grandchildren. My new granddaughter will be born in February. And so after seminary, I never was going to be a pastor guy. I just didn't feel like that was my calling. I was going to go get a PhD, but decided against that because we'd gotten married and I just couldn't see another 5 years. And while academia wasn't completely woke back then in the 80s, it was plenty bad. So I just didn't want to do that. And so I just got a job, raised a family. And then, and having gone to Westminster, apologetics is pretty important. And I was into that. I read Francis Schaeffer's The God Who Is There when I was probably 20. And that was my introduction to apologetics. And for those who don't know, apologetics is a defense of the veracity of the Christian faith. And it was awesome because I only became a Christian because I believed it was real, that God was there. And then to see that there was a bunch of evidence to actually prove it was amazing. So I've always had this apologetics heart. And then I got away from it for a long time because I was building business and doing this and that. And then in 2009, I got back into apologetics heavy, and there was an explosion of resources since the 80s, which was amazing. And I just learned everything I could. And in 2015, I came across an article by a young woman who grew up in a Christian home. She very involved. I mean, this was not, surfacey. She goes off to the university in UVA and abandons her faith almost instantly. And it so ticked me off. I thought to myself, that would never happen to my children, because all my life I'd spent teaching them that Christianity is the truth. So I decided to write a book, which I'd never done before. And I was 55, almost 55, and called it The Persuasive Christian Parent, How to Build an Enduring Faith in You and Your Children. Because I just don't think, when you look at secularism, it's so poverty. I talk about that in the book, how it's just promise everything and delivers nothing. And Christianity is a far superior worldview and life and everything. So that started me being an author. Then I wrote Uninvented, which is a book about how the Bible could not be made up. And then this book. So the inspiration for this book was Trump. And I despised Trump. When he came down the escalator, there's nothing about the guy that that was Trump for me. It's like, and I thought it was a joke. And then I started to hear some people who took him seriously, like Larry Arnn. He's the president of Hillsdale College. And I was like, And what really convinced me was how, as I say in the book, it wasn't Trump so much that started this, what I believe is a great awakening. It was the reaction to Trump. People were so over the top. It's like, nobody can be this bad. And the fact that his children were solid, decent citizens, ran his businesses, loved and respected their father. I say, narcissistic psychopaths don't pull that off, So I started listening to him. So a year later, in June of 16, I begrudgingly voted for him in the Illinois primary. We lived in Illinois at the time. I'm down in Tampa, Florida now. And my mother-in-law had to talk me into voting for him.
That's funny.
It is. It cracks me up. I look back at it. And so, all right, so I'm in. And then this gets to the whole red pill, because the title of the book, the subtitle is Trump, A Great Awakening and the Refounding of America. And it has the two hands. So you see here, there's the two hands. One's the blue and one's the red pill. And for those who haven't seen the movie, The Matrix, with Keanu Reeves, it was a 1990 massive hit movie. And he gets presented by Morpheus, this character. The name of his actor is escaping me, but he presents him with an option. He says, there's this thing, The Matrix. If you really want to find out what's going on, here's the red pill, right? You take it, go down the rabbit hole, and you'll see what reality is all about. And then, or not, just take the blue pill and go on your merry way. And, life will just be whatever it is. So that red pill metaphor is so profound. And normally it depends on you. Like in the movie, it's he decided to take it. I didn't.
Right.
I had no intention of being red pilled at all. And Trump was the instigator, not only of mine, but of, tens of millions of people all over the world, in fact.
Yeah.
So so he's elected, and then the lies begin. And you begin just to see what's going on. And you see Connie, who I've been part of the conservative movement since 1980, when Reagan was elected. And I just bought Buckley, the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I was weaned on those guys to be a conservative. And the conservative movement, for nothing but 4 decades, lost. Mm-hmm. And we're just losers. And it was so frustrating. And here's Trump saying, you're going to win. We're going to win so much, you're going to get tired of winning. It's like, is that even allowed? And, it's interesting because my perspective on the conservative movement completely changed because I trusted those people because they said all the right words, but nothing ever changed. The only thing they conserved was liberalism and progressivism's gains,
Yeah.
So, so I'll fast forward. The election is stolen, I believe, that on November of 2020, which providentially got allowed, which was the best thing that ever happened. And then J6, and I was so low, they won. The left won, the Uniparty, the rhinos. It's over. And I find Steve Bannon's War Room. And for those who don't know who Steve Bannon is, he built with Andrew Breitbart that kind of media empire and started his own podcast. And I found it, after the election. And as I always say, he got me out of the fetal position and to mix metaphors, talked me off the ledge. And I was really depressed. And so he actually, he has no time for thumbsuckers. And what I loved about him is that he preaches our agency. And for those who aren't familiar with the word, it simply means we can change things. As Christians, we're made in God's image, right? That means we are co-creators. He's actually given us a world to mold, to do things with. And I'd lost that. I'd become such a pessimist, for various reasons. And then he says, the only thing that it takes once you realize you have agency is action, action, action. He's a Roman Catholic. I theologically have nothing in common with the guy, the Nicene Creed, which is good enough for me.
Yeah.
But man, and then he's basically the leader of the grassroots movement. And he would have regular Americans through his show every day, just saying, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing. We can do this. We can do this. We can win. We can make things happen. We can change things. We can take our country back. It's like, so that became the kind of the motivation to write the book. And COVID, of course, was the huge red pill.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was for many people.
Millions of people.
So
I don't want to keep blathering.
No, that's
you want
great.
to go certain directions.
You've mentioned a lot that I want to unpack there. The first thing I want to ask you about, which is kind of random, but I'm just curious. You went to Westminster back in the 80s. Who were some of the big names back there at Westminster in the 80s that you were learning from?
Vern Poythress, polymath, brilliant guy. See, now you're going to, I wish you would have warned me. Yeah. I could see them. The Sams, he always would say the Sams. He's from Scotland. Doggone it. I should look it all up while we're on here.
You're fine. Yeah, you can do that. Cause I see these pictures. I see these pictures of all these guys at Westminster. I mean, it was like a hotbed of Reformed Protestant, just thinking apologetics, and a lot of them were borrowing from or inheriting Van Til and kind of promoting presuppositionalism and all this kind of stuff. Was Frame a professor of yours back
Frame
then?
is a professor at Westminster West.
Oh, that was when that was going on.
Right. He was not part of Westminster East, but I learned a ton from him as well. Yeah. I wish I could find, because there's so many notable faculty. Sinclair Ferguson, how could I forget Sinclair? Yeah. We had Old Testament with him. He was the Sams, he would always say. Richard Gaffin, New Testament. He was incredible. Richard Gamble was another one. Of course, Poythress. We took Tremper Longman, Old Testament.
Yeah, that's right. I used his comments.
I took Hebrew from him, and in fact, Van Til was still alive when I went there. He died in Moises Silva. I took Galatians from him. It was so awesome.
That's crazy. Those are so many names I've read. I've used their commentaries, and I had no idea they were all in the same place.
At the same time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Those 2 years. And Van Til died in 87. We started in 86, and we graduated in 88. But that was, since you know about apologetics, and presuppositionalism, it was so frustrating because at the same time I was reading Classical Apologetics by R.C. Sproul,
Yep.
and I'm trying to understand presuppositionalism, and it just perplexes me. And you try to read Van Til, and it's inscrutable because the guy is a horrible writer, you know. And they say he doesn't talk like that, but you know, when you write him, he writes in Dutch or something. I don't know. And I just could never understand it. And it's taken me till really the last few years to realize I'm a practical presuppositionalist in that whenever I'm talking really anything, I always go back to assumptions.
Sure.
You know, presuppositions. And I find that that's just a very effective way to argue for the veracity of anything, really. And then, but I'm not a doctrinaire or ideological presuppositionalist.
Right.
Because those guys believe if you don't believe that, you're not doing biblical apologetics.
I know. It's wild. I know. It's a big thing for me because,
oh, yeah. Okay.
you know, I encounter precepts. I love them. Like they're, you know, they're like bulls in a china shop, and they're great. Like if they can be handled, if they can be reined in. But it's just like, I think Doug Groothuis, who you cite in the book, he taught me when I was in seminary, like it's one tool in your tool belt.
Oh, totally.
And, you know, if you can use it, that's great. But don't make it like the one thing you use.
Here's the definitive proof that it isn't the way. I've listened to, since COVID, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of testimonies. And I have heard one of my favorite websites is, it's called Ex-Skeptic now. It was called Side B Stories. And it's basically atheists and skeptics who've come to Christ. And I can't tell you how many of those people came to Christ through the cosmological argument. So how can that work? Like I say, it's whether you start with the right assumptions or you eventually get to them. That's the point, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
So
it's funny. I have Van Til on my shelf. I don't think I've ever read him because I've been distracted by other things that I need to read.
You should give it a try just to experience it.
Just to experience it after he told me he's a bad writer. That's funny.
It's just hard, you know, and I believe he's brilliant. And, you know, there's so much good to learn from these guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm a big fan of Rushdoony and whatever his name is. You know who I'm talking about.
Gary North.
Yeah, North too.
Yeah.
And Bonson. You know, I love Bonson.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have a hard time with dogmatic people. It's
Yeah.
weird because I used to be that way.
I know.
And God's kind of beat it out of me.
Yep.
You know?
You eventually get tired.
Like I realize I could be wrong, you know, so I joke with my friend who we've interacted a lot about this. And I said, you know, when you get to heaven, they're going to tell you that the Catholics were right. And he's like, no.
That's funny. All right. So with your kind of journey, because I was born in 86, right? When you started at
oh, wow. Okay.
Westminster. And so, you know, one thing that's been challenging for me. So I came of age when Bush W was like, you know, the conservative guy, right? And so it's right after 9/11. Me and my friends are in high school. America, America, America. I've got the Bush sticker on my big lifted vehicle in Texas. And I go and listen to Bush at SMU. And
this was after he was president?
No, this was before. So I didn't even get to vote for him. And I think it was 2004. But he was doing kind of a whatever they do. They go out and do some stump speeches and all that. And so I shake his hand. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wash this hand. Like, this is amazing. And now 2024, 2025 when we're recording, 20 years later, I look back and I'm like, wait, he was a neocon, you know, like he was like, so help me as someone who's older, has, you know, been a fan of Reagan and Bush and all these guys. How are we to evaluate them fairly, but also honestly? You know, because I think for a lot of whether boomers, you know, like when COVID was first happening and BLM and all this stuff, like people would ask me, okay, well, who was kind of the conservative guy you think was the greatest president? And, you know, a lot of boomers celebrate Reagan. And so I would say Reagan. And at this point, I just say Washington because I'm like after him. It just,
it's all downhill.
Yeah. But with someone like Reagan, for example, you know, how are we to evaluate these guys? I mean, like, there's now a big movement amongst guys my age to look at Nixon and look at what happened, because like the accusation is they took him out
Oh, they
because he
did
was
that.
so conservative and that kind of stuff. So like,
which is arguable, but yes, in some ways.
Right. Yeah. So like, how do you think Christians can fairly evaluate, given your writing, kind of what you've experienced and what you know?
So that whole journey through conservatism is so fascinating to me because I was born in 1960, and when we talk about red pilling and boomers, it's so difficult for people your age and younger to conceive of an America with 3 channels. With the other one was PBS, right? So 4 maybe, right? Public television. That's it. I mean, Walter Cronkite would come on and that's the way it was. Whatever, this is the way it is. This is, and it's so easy to be programmed to think a certain way, and in every way. So, that happens over decades. And when I became a conservative, the conservative movement, like Buckley was my hero. I mean, like, wow. I didn't even know there was a post-World War II consensus,
right.
What that meant. And I one of the blessings of writing a book is you just learn so much in the writing. And to see all this in hindsight, and to see how I was programmed and why. And so you talk about Bush, I mean, I was all for the first Gulf War. And, it's like, and there's Pat Buchanan, who I've, always appreciated, but become a much bigger a fan of now. When he spoke at the Houston Convention in 92, and he's talking about a culture war, and the uniparty rhino Republicans were just embarrassed by the guy. This is a religious war. And they're going, oh, say that, and because fundamentally conservatives are liberals in skirts.
Okay.
I mean, they are liberals, classical liberals, whatever you want to call them. And part of the worldview, the vision, the paradigm of conservatives, liberals is secularism. That's just how they see the world. And so when Pat Buchanan comes along and says these things, it's embarrassing for them, because we live in a pluralistic democracy and republic, and there's no one right way, and so on and so forth. So it was just becoming disillusioned slowly but surely. Then you have the second Gulf. I'll never forget. Okay, you have Bush W after 9/11. Boom, we're going to find weapons of mass destruction. The CIA wouldn't lie to us, would they?
Right, right.
And which I think is such a joke now, because maybe all they do is lie. And I remember hearing, well, I think it was on the radio. I was in the car somewhere, and they haven't found any weapons of mass destruction. I'm going, oh, that's not good. Because this is the pretext.
Yeah.
And then you look back at how many people hundreds of thousands, millions of Iraqis died, not to mention how many thousands of Americans died and are mutilated. It just makes you weep. And then forever wars. And then I'll never forget. Okay, so you're looking back at this. Here's Trump, the first debate in 2016, and he just rips Bush and the Iraq war. And I felt physically uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Trump, just don't do that. Oh, there's Bush standing beside him,
right.
Whatever. And I'm just like, oh, and he becomes righter and righter the longer things go on, and now, so the conservative movement is completely, you look at what they're doing to him now, they're still doing it, right? Yeah. I mean, that's why I love Bannon, and I still watch him every day. I don't agree with him on everything, because he's whatever. I don't agree with myself all the time.
Sure.
But he realizes this is war.
Yeah.
November 5th was just the beginning. I mean, it wasn't, it was great. Okay. We celebrate, have a glass of champagne and move on, and that's the battle we're in. And it's against this whole uniparty establishment, administrative state, the bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. So it's hard not to see the truth if you want to,
right. Yeah. It's weird because, I joke that there's kind of a Bernie bro to Christian nationalist pipeline that is still being tapped to this day. Like even yesterday, Bernie tweeted out something that all the conservatives were like, wait,
Yeah.
why is he making sense? So it's very interesting. One of the guys you've mentioned on the episode and in the book is this guy Steve Bannon, and I'd like to know more about. You came across his worm. I've never watched Bannon. I've seen some of his articles, and some of
Oh,
his
okay.
video clips seem really good.
Yeah, yeah.
But was he prosecuted? Did he go to jail? Like, what's kind of his journey?
Yeah, I mean, he would not. So this was all part of the J6 committee,
Okay.
which was illegal, and that's what he constantly says, because they didn't have minority counsel, and it was just a joke. Yet, the media played it up, and the rhinos kind of let him go on with it, and he wouldn't testify with confidential information that he had with Trump as the president. Never had to. It's never been prosecuted in the history of America. And so he's like, okay, I'll just go to prison then. I don't care. I'm not bending. I'm not doing what you want me to do just to. And so he gladly spent 4 months in prison. And they did the same to another gentleman who was part of the administration. And, and that was, I think people are seeing the injustice of it all. Because after all the indictments of Trump and the Mar-a-Lago raid and all these things, it's just this the Injustice Department, and so people are seeing that, and Bannon was just part of it because he is the leader of the MAGA movement. I mean, the kind of the grassroots on the ground action guy who's there, and he's just takes no prisoners. I mean, he says things and you're going, whoa. Okay.
Yeah. Anything I've seen from him is very fiery, and he always seems to have an appearance of someone that's unkempt. And
Yes.
and that's fine. Like, I don't really care. It kind of adds to the mystique whenever I see it. But I've kind of been like, what you talked about being programmed, you get programmed a lot by, social media. You talked about kind of the news networks back in the day. But you basically will start believing certain narratives and certain stories about people. And he's a great example of someone who, for the last 8 years, what you hear from mainstream media is that this guy's a radical right winger. You can't listen to him. You can't trust him. And that really is the programming.
Right.
It's a matter of trust. And it's a credentialing thing where it's like, you can listen to these voices, but if you listen to these voices, you're a threat. You're dangerous, you're all that kind of stuff. Is that kind of how they've tried to frame? Am I remembering kind of how they've framed him
for
correctly?
Bannon?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, white supremacist, the whole deal. I mean, he's dangerous. And if you listen to the guy, he is so spot on, and just the way he frames things. Like the first time I ever heard that the Republicans are the controlled opposition was from Steve Bannon. They're in it for the grift. That's what I came finally to the realization. The Republicans, most of them, are in it for the money and basically power, but really, so it all comes down to money. And they're the controlled opposition. And so, and as we learned through COVID, especially, but before that, and this all started with Obama, wanting to fundamentally transform America. In fact, I talk in the book about this article. It was a study done about words in media post 2010, and all of the words that we're familiar with now, the woke, the white supremacy and patriarchy, or whatever ones you want to come up with, they just all of a sudden these became issues in 2010.
Yeah.
So it all started there with the framing and the narrative, which is very postmodern. It's this idea that the only thing that counts isn't the truth, but it's the narrative. It's what we determine, and the media does it, and Republicans, the rhinos, go along with it. And one of the narratives is that there's this white, first of all, only whites can be racist, which is absurd, right? Because whites are the least racist people on earth, Americans, really. And but that's it. And so that's a narrative. And Bannon is just the worst of the worst, because he was in Hitler's in his administration, right? And now he's getting Hitler reelected, and before you know it, we're all going to the gas chambers. I mean, but I don't know if it's just BS or they really believe it. Some are true believers,
I know.
But I, the reason my second chapter is the dividing line in Western culture is truth, is that those who actually believe in truth just were repelled by the media's lies. And eventually, I always say an empire built on lies can't stand, and that's why Reagan, when we talk about Reagan, he knew that the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall were just paper mache, just an illusion. They were weak because you just can't lie forever. I mean, and the reason is, and I say that I do a section titled "The Metaphysical and Spiritual Implications of Truth," and the reason is because we believe in He who is the truth.
Yep.
Right? Truth is a person. It isn't just the nature of things. And that's why anybody who believes in truth is closer to Jesus than someone who doesn't. And that's really the dividing line.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of people right now who, I think Joe Rigney or someone else has called it kind of reality respectors, people who are interested in truth.
That's a good way to put it.
And there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit that seem to be ignored by many, at least from my vantage point. I came from a kind of a network and associations with the Gospel Coalition and kind of Big Eva and this kind of thing. Not that I was ever like,
were you like young, restless, and reformed? That kind of era?
Yeah. I was swept up in that movement, and I've done an episode with Brad Vermerlin on that, and just kind of shared my story with that. But for a lot of them, these people who are reality respecters are seen as either dangerous or a threat. The people they want to reach are the woke, are the liberal, are the kind of like, you'll see Dan Darling tweet or these other people tweet, and it's like,
what's shocking when you speak about that. I talk about Naomi Wolf, in the book, and for those who don't know Naomi Wolf, she's probably close to my age. Now she's younger, probably late 50s, and she's a feminist, liberal, utterly secular, and she's just, all my adult life I've known about her and read her, and just to get frustrated and angry, and COVID just boom woke her up. She started appearing on Bannon. This is why I respect Bannon so much. She started appearing on Bannon's War Room, and her and Bannon disagree on most things, right? But they agree on truth, and they agree that this thing that went on was so egregiously bad, and she's on consistently talking about this. I'm like, I can't wrap my mind around Naomi Wolf being on Bannon's War Room.
It's crazy.
It is. And slowly but surely, she's coming back to her belief in God. And she tells that in a story in a book of hers about what really convinced her that God is there, because she was totally an agnostic, whatever, before, is that this whole COVID thing was so exquisitely evil that it couldn't be made up on the I forget the way she puts it, bumbling reality of just human invention. It would take more than humans to do something so evil. So that's why she believed in God.
That's fascinating.
Became to believe again. And she's on I think I mentioned to you before we went on, my heathen prayer list is that she hasn't made it to Jesus. She's got to find her Messiah. And I pray for her every week, But believing in truth is going to get you closer. And we're so on the other side of the Enlightenment now and secularism, because I see secularism. I've always called it a Berlin Wall. It's just, see, you were born when the Berlin Wall was still up, but you don't have much memory of it, do you?
No.
So that year you were born was when Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And, all of us are going, Ronnie, you're delusional now. The Berlin Wall's not coming down in our lifetimes. Just accept that fact. A couple of years later, it was, because he understood it's going in the dustbin of history because it's all built on lie. I quote Solzhenitsyn in the book. He lived not by lies was something he wrote about, right? It's just, and that's why I was so, as I wrote the book and started to develop it and think about it, and as stuff continued to happen, it's like this, they can't sustain the lies. They think they're succeeding, but if you have to lie to have success, that is it really success?
Right. Yeah. And I think what makes me sad is like a lot of Christians, the way they're trained apologetically, and a lot of the pastors who either plant in blue context or any kind of urban context, the main target demographic they have in the back of their mind is the most radical left winger. And so they're trying to make church or the Christian faith as compatible, would be putting it probably.
You're talking about Tim Keller, right?
Sure. Well, I actually wasn't. I was just thinking about all the pastors I've talked to. Like,
he seemed to start that trend, right?
Yeah.
And I understand it. He was a huge influence on me. He was at Westminster. I should have mentioned Keller when we were there, and he was our premarital counselor.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. Everybody's like, really? That was before he was Tim Keller, right? And I'll never forget the first thing he says. I mean, out of the chute, you give us some stuff to review and a personality test. And he goes, the only sinner bigger than the one you're marrying is you. Whoa, that's rude. After 37 years of marriage, spot on.
Yeah. That's
but
funny.
yeah, it is wild. But, it's interesting. He goes there. Everybody's mocking him like, you're an idiot. And that was pre-Giuliani. That's when New York City was a hellhole, right? And he goes there and he's going to preach to basically unbelievers who are coming to church, to non-Christians. And, so I bought his book when I got back into apologetics in 2009, The Reason for God, which was hugely helpful. I didn't realize how problematic a lot of what he said and did was until post Red Pill and the last several years. But man, I'm grateful for him because I learned so much, but, is church really? I think pastors should preach apologetically, meaning we can't assume everybody sitting in the pews, Christian or not, believes that what they are teaching is actually the truth. So we need to build on not exclusively for non-Christians, right? But I, as a Christian, I had a low level of unbelief for much of my Christian life.
Right.
I was functionally secular in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I could go down that rabbit hole.
With something that Keller, speaking of that, but he's representative of a much broader movement in kind of evangelicalism in America. There's something that C.S. Lewis wrote on, and I can't remember where he wrote on it, but he talks about how it's easier to minister and share the gospel with pagans, outright pagans. And by pagans, we're not just referring to like Nordic Vikings. We're referring to people who either worship the sun. I mean, there's a lot of pagans in Boulder. It's easier to imagine, pagans than it is to a modern person, because the modern secularist has basically lied to themselves their whole life about the nature of things and how there's outside forces and spiritual entities and that kind of thing. And I found that to be very true. Like it's much easier to have these kind of conversations about truth with people who are willing to believe something rather than somebody who's willing to kind of put blinders on themselves and say, no, there is no outside force. No, it's almost like nihilistic. Do you find that true as well in apologetics?
Well, yeah. I mean, if someone's just, it's interesting. I realized a long time ago how pernicious secularism is, in that, we went through the whole new atheist phase, right? The angry atheists, you believe in the flying spaghetti monster, you're an idiot, you believe in God type of stuff, right? Well, that's all passé. But what's way worse is this underlying secularism where God is simply persona non grata. He's unwelcome at the table. He's an irrelevancy. N.T. Wright calls this, modern people just basically Epicureans. Sure, God's there, but he's irrelevant for life. So we don't watch TV anymore in terms of network or whatever. We stream things, and so almost every show you see, and I enjoy these shows. I learn from them. I see the veracity of the Christian worldview in the shows, even though they're utterly secular. But God's invisible. I mean, literally invisible. So you watch this stuff, and unless you're oriented like you are, right? This just programs you into secularism.
Yeah.
So God, when he's in the show we're watching called This Is Us, which was on network TV, and it's on Netflix now, the whole thing. And, they can't even say God. They have to say, well, the universe is trying to teach me something.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. but that's so powerful. I can't even tell you. So when I wrote my first book, The Persuasive Christian Parent, I talk about the clicker. And then I'm the master of the clicker in my house, of course. And so we could not get through a show without me stopping and teaching my children what's going on here. If it's God's invisible, I would lecture them about that, and to show them the absolute poverty-stricken nature of secularism. That's why the reason I wrote the book is because there were this whole thing about nuns in 2015-ish. Nuns, meaning NONES, is if you do a survey and you will pick none of the above when asked for your religious preference. And everyone's worried, like, oh, all these young people are leaving the Christian faith. They grow up in a Christian home. Well, they shouldn't. If we can't sell them on the beauty of the Christian worldview and the Christian faith and the truth of it, something's wrong.
Yeah.
People think I'm judgmental, but I mean, seriously, it's so powerful. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite quotes, which I have on the front of that book, is he was an atheist, right? The reason he became a Christian, he said, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else.
Yeah.
So my favorite metaphor is puzzles and puzzle pieces. It can be just a puzzle piece and you're trying to fit all the reality into it. And your life is basically a Woody Allen movie. You would just end up oh, well, I guess that's all there is, resignation, right? Or party, But when you have God in the big picture, the puzzle pieces start to fit. It's like, oh, I see. Now you're not trying to fit that into there and make it,
Yeah, and that's easier. It's easier to work with somebody who's like interested in making a puzzle rather than somebody who denies that puzzles exist.
You exist, exactly. That is the spot on. And people who are into, just like Russell Brand is a great example. Man, dude was searching, and it was Eastern mysticism was his thing. And, eventually God opened his heart and now he's on fire. I mean, he's reading C.S. Lewis and Joe Boot and, it's amazing. But that's an example, a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. All right. With someone of your caliber and your age, I wanted to talk about boomers. And this is a dangerous topic in some circles because as soon as you talk about boomers, people kind of freak out. I personally, the boomers I know, maybe the ones that don't like me have alienated themselves from me, unbeknownst to me. But like the ones I've interacted with have all been very receptive. Even boomers who are of a liberal variety.
Well, your dad's a boomer.
Yeah.
Is he red-pilled?
I would say he's red pill, but I don't even know,
really?
If that's like language he's familiar with. He's a businessman and he's not online, but he listens to the show. Like you may
nice.
Probably listen to this episode. And we have great conversations on everything from civil rights to what's happening in America. Mike, one of the funny things was in 2020, I remember one of our relatives, an older relative, looking at me, and I think she's whatever was before boomer, silent generation or something.
Right. I think that's what it's called.
And she was like, I don't know what's happening to our country. And I don't know what are we going to do about it. And I'm not a charismatic, at least in the modern sense of the term, but in that moment, I felt a sense of duty where I was like, you're my family and I feel the same way. And I will do something. And if that just means me starting a podcast or writing articles or speaking the truth with clarity and boldness, or trolling people online sometimes, then yeah, I'm going to do whatever. Like I'm going to honor my ancestors by doing that. And that was a big thing for me. But for a lot of boomers, they seem like I've asked this question online before. Like me and my millennial friends, we're pretty self-deprecating, and that can be fun. But it can also be a liability. You don't want to tear yourself down needlessly. A lot of preachers will use this tactic to try to get on people's level. And I don't think that's always the best tactic, but can be useful. But a lot of millennials don't take themselves seriously at all, almost to a fault, right? Almost to where they have no self-respect. And so you can make fun of millennials all day, lack of work ethic, avocado toast, all this kind of stuff. I don't really care. But as soon as you pick on boomers or you say something about boomers, there seems to be they become the snowflake that they most resent. And I wanted to understand that more, like what's going on there? How come boomers are kind of this way?
Well, in defense of boomers, it's we we get blamed for everything. Every modern ill is the boomers' fault, which is understandable because, it kind of is. but it's funny because one of the things I love, and I try to, my mind thinks this way, is historical progression. Where we are today, one of the reasons that the title of the book made sense to me, the Going Back to Find the Way Forward, is that we have to see each step in the progression of how we got here. So in effect, the boomers were a necessary piece of the puzzle to get us to the post-boomer, to get us to this disaster. I talk in the book about Marxism and cultural Marxism and wokeness and the Enlightenment and Rene Descartes and rationalism and all this stuff. And then you got progressivism and the growth of secularism. And all of this stuff was what's going to happen? You have the 20s, which was a depraved generation to the people who lived in it, right? And these young people, the flappers and all that stuff and so on. So, I think some of us can be, a little overly sensitive because, it's just funny to read people. It's like, oh, it's like, we're not all that bad. And it'll get a laugh. But I'm thinking of a lyric by, I don't know if I tell him in the book, but the baby boomers wasted all, the baby boomers, I forget. I'll try to put it up here while we're talking. But it's, in the destruction, in all of the stuff that silent generation person was talking about, is the opportunity. I'm reading through slowly with Calvin through his commentary on Isaiah, and so many Christians see judgment as an end. God's going to judge America, for all of our horrific sins, which we have, right? But they almost, I don't know if they want to do this, but it's almost like that's the end game. It's like, smash them.
Right.
Will just all be a pile of ashes and they'll be going, see, you were judged by God. And God is actually judging us in his mercy.
Yes.
To get us to repent, to see truth, to see bigger things, to see things that we would never otherwise see. When we had to go through the tragedy of COVID, think about how many people died and just, it's horrific.
Yeah.
The suffering. But it was through, just like Joseph, right? They throw him into the well and gets carted off. His life is misery for how long? Confronts the brothers, is what you intended for evil, God intended for good. So it's my overarching understanding of God's providence, going back to his promise to Abram. What was that promise? Okay, I'm picking one guy out of the whole earth, all of the heathens in the world. I'm going to pick one of you heathens and I'm going to turn you into my people. And through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. God, Jesus, when he came, what did he say? Not to judge, right? To bless. I'm bringing salvation. And that's what I'm coming. That's why his first coming was about, to bring salvation. And so all of this history of this stuff and how boomers played in that, the sexual revolution and drugs and rock and roll, the best rock and roll ever, of course. You might debate that.
No, I think I agree. I turn on, my dad raised me on all that stuff. I went and saw.
So you have a good dad.
I don't know if
solid
Rush,
dad, actually.
Does Rush count in your category?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No,
yeah,
Rush was awesome.
I took my dad to a Rush concert in high school as like a Father's Day present.
No.
And it was wild. It was great. But I love that music. Like, I think it's great. It's actually real music. It's not made on a computer.
Yeah, it's so amazing how, we watched several times. We watched Charlie Brown's Christmas, 65, Vince Guaraldi with my granddaughter. She's totally into it now. She's going to be 3. And just there was something about that time that captured a kind of creativity and wonder that, is so wonderful. As much garbage that came out of that time period, you just, wow, the Beatles and Zeppelin and the Doors and Cream and, Chicago and, and Rush. My brother, Genesis, I'm a big old Genesis fan. My brother's a drummer. He's a professional musician. He says, I turned him on all the great music. and Rush and Neil Peart, because he's a drummer.
Yeah.
He was, I'd bring home 2120. I remember from college, and Nick, you need to hear this. It's like, whoa. And he starts playing to Rush and learning the licks.
That's funny.
So, yeah.
Well, with the boomers, so like it seems like there's a litany of issues that run contrary to kind of if I can generalize, like kind of boomer kind of like operating system, like the OS of boomers. The peak one would be reevaluating World War II, like the post-war consensus. Like that seems to be like the one that like if you're trying to red pill a boomer, like you probably don't lead with a reevaluation of World War II, in any way, like that's not going to be your safe topic to have a conversation about.
To
first.
say the least, right? If you're on Twitter, you understand that.
Yeah, but what would be like safe things if you were seeking to have a conversation with somebody from an older generation that isn't where you are, isn't where I am, but you just want to like start to begin a dialogue. What are safe topics that you can kind of introduce to the table and find more agreement than disagreement on, if that makes sense? So whether it's like COVID or Trump, like what are things that in your mind that you're like people, friends that you have, family members that you have of your age cohort, what are topics that are like helpful to start conversations to, I mean, you advocate for this for red pilling people. What would be safe topics to introduce?
Well, those two, I mean, couldn't have any better because politically, most older Americans are conservative generally, right? And one of the beauties of our time, and why I saw it as a great awakening and as an opportunity, is the left went so whack. I mean, so far that, and to me, that's part of God's judgment. He was saying, okay, this is what you want. We'll give you over to it. Go for it. And they're under the illusion that they could pull this off. And actually, men are women and boys are girls. And I think, and by this point, Trump is begrudgingly respected by most people, And so you certainly can begin to talk about, they've lied to us about, I mean, you pick it, right? Because the whole Trump-Russia collusion thing wouldn't have happened without Republicans. They're the ones that gave the money to Mueller, $30-40 million. So that, and politically, but I think that idea of questioning the narrative, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Because if you start to question, and then the other thing, COVID is health. I've been on a huge health journey, and that was, I thank God for it, because it took me till I was 60 to even begin to question the medical industrial complex, big pharma, big food, and all that stuff. And and I'm still learning, every day. But man, I think a lot of people, I think one of the geniuses of RFK Jr. was talking about the children.
Yeah.
Who wants their children to be sick?
Right.
Right. And so you have to question. And I have examples. I mean, I could bring up to people. So I had dermatitis earlier this year, and I've been doing, I've been changing everything, and I go to a professional dermatologist, and this was bad. I mean, I had it on my arms and legs and red, and it was itching. And it says, well, you have this dermatitis. It's a fungal thing. It's a yeast infection, whatever. And she gives me medicine, and then they give me a piece of paper that explains what it is, and it says, it's an immune response of the body with no known cause. And I are you kidding me? I mean, it just infuriated me.
Sure.
What do you mean there's no known cause? And so that finally was the final straw where I was going to go get an integrative holistic doctor. I ended up using a nutritionist. She puts me on these just basic a protocol of herbs and a probiotic, and changes some things, tweaks some things in my diet, which was pretty decent anyway. And it goes away. It was fungal overgrowth in my gut, and I had leaky gut. And it's like, so the professional, and it's so when you just get people, I can use that as a story to say, look, what is the medical establishment telling you that you shouldn't question?
Right.
So I think it's just developing a questioning mentality of whatever the narratives are. And it's hard for us. It really is, because, I was born in 60 at the apex of the expert. Who wouldn't think of questioning a doctor?
Right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, so, and I have to read this to you. This is Goodness Gracious, Kevin Gilbert, this song called Thud. But the song's called Goodness Gracious, and this is about a baby boomer thing. Goodness gracious, of apathy I sing. The baby boomers had it all and wasted everything. Now recess is almost over, and they won't get off the swing. That is so good. Goodness gracious, we came in at the end. No sex that isn't dangerous. No money left to spend. We're the cleanup crew for parties we were too young to attend. Goodness gracious me. That's so good, because I was doing that for my sister. The parties at our folks' house, and I was the cleanup crew. And they were too old; they wouldn't let me drink or smoke pot, but I could clean up.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've since, you mentioned RFK, I've since the most success talking about the grandkids and the children. Because I think,
and you're a pastor of a church, so you interact with all generations.
I do. Yeah, we have Boulder's a pretty young. A third of the town is under the age of 22. And so it's a fairly young context. And the people who move to Boulder are typically not conservative. And they're typically not older Christians. If you're an older Christian, you're not like, where can I retire to? Boulder, Colorado. That's where I can really fit
not quite warm enough for me.
And so yeah, we have a good age range for our context, but yeah, it's just interesting to try to like help people come along in any way. And I think the danger, not for necessarily me, because I'm naturally a skeptic, is we're not trying to make people cynical for the sake of cynicism. We're trying to open them up to the possibility that, hey, there's something bigger going on here. And you talk about that in the book. You mentioned the Great Awakening. I'm wondering, when you use that phrase, because there's been several Great Awakenings in the United States. The first one generally better than the second. The second one was fairly bad track record up in upper state New York, giving birth to all sorts of cults. The Burned Over District. Yeah. And feminism came from there. But what in your mind, when you refer to this Great Awakening, what are you referring to there? Just the reawakening to truth? Or are you talking about spiritual revival? What are you referring to?
Yeah, that's an important question, because we tend to visualize awakenings as everybody going, it started with Wesley, right? And Wesley and Whitfield. And, they're out in the field, and there thousands of people are coming, and they're making decisions for Jesus to be born again. And, and the Second Great Awakening is the same way. There's all these proclamations and spiritual, and you have Billy Graham in our, the 20th century, and coming down the aisle to As I Am, and so on and so forth, making a decision for Jesus. And so this Great Awakening is wholly different than that, because it has, to undergirding it all is a spiritual component, because those Great Awakenings were influenced by pietism. And most Christians they maybe have heard the word piety. They know what piety is, being pious and, serious about your faith. But pietism was a German Lutheran movement in the 17th century that kind of was against the scholasticism, the intellectualism of the day, the dry doctrinal whatever. And, over time it became this kind of bifurcated or like dualistic understanding of reality, of the spiritual stuff. And that's up over here. And then the mundane and everyday stuff's over down here, not as important, So when you're going to hear Whitfield or Wesley, or in the second, or Billy Graham, your soul is being saved. So when you die and you go to heaven, that's the thing, right? Many Christians think that's what Christianity is about, but it isn't. That's a way narrow view. This awakening is different, because it's applying these spiritual underpinnings of it all to all of reality. Because Christianity, just like I quoted C.S. Lewis, right? It's all things. What does God say about government and health? Health is part of a Great Awakening. That's bizarre. But I believe, my eschatological perspective is that, God is actually bringing his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And so part of that is learning the beauty of his creation to sustain us as creatures and live healthy, productive lives. Nobody wants to be sick, right? And that's part of the awakening. And that's COVID. God providentially kind of ordaining all this stuff is insane. But it's, if he can create everything out of nothing, this is no big deal for him. So I think the phrase you used about it's more truth widespread, but in every area, then we can then bring Christ back in.
Yeah.
It gives us an opportunity because at all points, it's literally every point in the sphere you could pull off here and say, okay, we're getting to Jesus from this. We're going to get to Jesus from that. We're going to get to Jesus from that, and Jesus makes sense of all that for you, friend.
Yeah.
You need him because without him, it's all kind of blah.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
So it's very much different than previous. And I think it's because people are beginning, Christians and even non-Christians now are saying, well, Aaron Renn, his negative world, right?
Yeah.
So up until the 80s, you had Americans generally saw Christianity as a positive influence on society. Oh, you're Christians. That's a good thing. And in the Clinton years in the 90s, it was neutral world. It was like, yeah, it's not good or bad, but yeah, you're okay. You're one, you're fine. But then with the Obama years, it was negative world. So Christianity is a threat to every good and American thing, right? And this election and Trump, it's so bizarre. Trump, young people voted for him way more than they would have ever done before. And they're more open. You're familiar with Charlie Kirk?
Yeah.
Okay. What he did on college campuses. And they said, 4, 6, 8 years ago, they had hundreds of people. Now there was thousands upon thousands of people. And they're all open. If they're open to Trump, they're sort of open to the gospel too.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's wild.
It is. But there's so many opportunities today. Just so many. And
yeah. Well, I want to close with an opportunity for people to buy your book, because you do cover tons of ground, and we
never got into nationalism and the nation state and all that stuff.
We could keep going for another
Christian
hour.
Western civilization. Yeah, it's fun.
There's a lot, but you get into Nietzsche and cultural Marxism, like you said, and it's a very easy read for the listener in a good way, not dumbed down, but you write well, so it's easy to read. Where can people pick up a copy?
Yeah, in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and wherever books are sold.
That's great.
Yeah, and in my website, I blog at my name, MikeDiVirgilio.com, and I do a post every week. I record those for those that don't have time to read it, and then I've just got involved in Twitter earlier last year, like February. It's because I knew I had to do that, and I love the internet because it's the Gutenberg press of the 21st century. We can't be stifled because of the internet. And so I got on there and got interactive. And then Eschatology Matters is one of my favorite YouTube channels. And the guy who runs it asked me, Brandon, he said, would you like to do a podcast called The Based Boomer Podcast? I said, okay, I guess I have to. Because I've been thinking about it, but I just don't have the time, I think. And so I'm the host of the Based Boomer Podcast, which is a pretentious title, but it's kind of fun. Yeah, everybody seems to like the title. I told my wife before, because I'd been on John Harris's podcast about my red pill experience. Yeah, and I said if I do, and I was talking to her like the week before, if I do one, it should have Boomer in the title, but what would I, Yeah. And then Brandon one night texted me and I go, that's it.
That's great. Well, I'll make sure to put a link to those in the show notes for the listener. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Chase. It was a privilege and it was a blast. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Foolproof Theology. I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Mike. I know I did. Before I let you go, I wanted to remind you to sign up on the Patreon. You get early access to every episode, some swag if you sign up at $5 or $15 a month. It's a great way to stay in touch as well. If you have any questions or want to interact, have any guests you would like me to have a conversation with, please just sign up on the Patreon. Go to the show notes, sign up there. We're trying to keep great content coming to you. You can look forward to more great conversations. I've got Gary Stewart, who wrote about the revolution in America, the Revolutionary War, and what was going on in the pulpits during that time. That's coming up, and you can get early access to that. So make sure you go to the link in the show notes, sign up at the Patreon, support me at $5, $15 a month. It's a great way to keep supporting me and get it out to more people. Another great way to do it is to rate the podcast or rate the subscribe and smash, I guess is what they say, on YouTube. You can do that on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify or anything, give it a great rating, share this episode with a friend. Maybe you've got a boomer friend that you're trying to start conversations with, this will be a great episode to share with them. So I hope this episode blessed you and helped you, and we'll see you next time.